Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to this panel discussion on cyber terrorism and warfare, and I'd like to thank you for all coming today to hear our panel. My name is Steve Homer. I'm a professor of computer science and CAS. I am also, for the last 4 years, one of the two co-directors of the BU Risks Center. So before turning our evening over to our panel, I want to take just a couple of minutes to introduce the Risks Center and tell you a bit about it. The Risk Center at BU is the Center for Reliable Information Systems and Cybersecurity. It's a university-wide center housed in the Office of the Provost with members from 4 colleges and many information security-related disciplines. Risk has been both a research and a teaching mission, teaching mission at BU, and it's designated and supported by the NSA as a center of academic excellence in information assurance, education, and research. The research mission of RISKS is to promote and coordinate research in information security and assurance and on reliable and secure computation. It does this by working to strengthen collaboration between researchers in different fields, by offering regular lectures on topics of mutual interest, and by building partnerships with other universities and with industry and also with government. It is affiliated with similar centers at various locations and locally and also throughout the state of Massachusetts. Our education mission at RISKS features a certified curriculum in information assurance education through the NSA and through the Department of Homeland Security. It works with affiliated departments at BU offering master's degrees and certificate programs with concentrations in security and information assurance. It facilitates scholarships offered to degree program students, that is, students in any degree program at all levels, who are interested in studying security-related topics. So if you're interested in learning more about risks, either in terms of the education mission or in terms of the research part of risks, I've left some pamphlets outside. You can pick them up during the reception after the panel. In the past decade or so, issues of cybersecurity have become more and more prevalent. I've seen it happen in computer science, the department where I'm a member, and other technological fields. Many, in fact, most of the faculty in our department, both here and at other institutions, have enlarged their research programs to include aspects of computer security within their own research programs. And in computer science here at BU, in my own department, pretty much everyone now works at times on issues related to cybersecurity. So it's really sort of taken over at some level throughout the department. At the same time, I've noticed that issues revolving around cybercrime and public policy and concerning cybersecurity arise often and regularly, more regularly than ever, in news stories as government concern for our information networks and critical infrastructure grow. Just since last May, there have been at least 2 major government initiatives and reports on these issues, and President Obama has established a top-level office, or has begun to establish a top-level office to manage the United States strategy for securing cyberspace. And he's included in that an appointment of a new cybersecurity coordinator to lead this effort. I don't think such a person has been appointed yet, but will be soon. That will be the topic of that will be included some in the topic of our panel tonight, and we'll hear more about that. So I'm pleased now to introduce Professor Azer Bestavros of the Computer Science Department, who will be the panel's moderator. Professor Bestavros joined BU in 1991 after receiving his PhD from Harvard. He was a department chairman between 2000 and 2007, and like many of us, while his initial research work was in other areas, he actively includes many aspects of computer security in his current research efforts. So I'd like now to turn it over to Professor Bestavros and welcome you all on behalf of the College of Arts and Sciences. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome, and thank you for coming to this panel. So many of us hear words like, cyber warfare and cyber attacks, and it's scary. And we thought that today maybe we can talk a little bit about what do these words mean to start with. And there are 2 ways to think of it. You can think that it's cyberspace that is under attack, or that internet and cyberspace is being used to launch attacks. So with that in mind, we assembled a really distinguished panel, which I'm going to start by introducing. First, I'd like to introduce Arthur Hulnick, who is an associate professor in the International Relations Department at Boston University, specializing in strategic and business intelligence. Art, a graduate of Princeton University, is a veteran of more than 35 years in the profession of intelligence, including 7 years as an intelligence officer in the US Air Force and 28 years in the CIA. He came to BU as a CIA officer in residence in 1989 and remained on the faculty as a lecturer after his retirement from the government in 1992. Art is one of the early pioneers of developing courses at the university level on strategic intelligence, and he has published numerous scholarly articles on the subject, as well as a number of books. Some titles are Keeping Us Safe, Secret Intelligence and Homeland Security, published in 2004, Fixing the Spy Machine, Preparing American Intelligence for the 21st Century, published in 1999. In addition to the many courses he teaches at BU, including intelligence and homeland security and foreign intelligence security systems, Art regularly lectures at other universities and colleges on intelligence issues. In 1995, he developed a course on the uses of intelligence and security practices in the private sector, one of the very few courses on the subject taught in the United States. Join me in thanking Arthur for coming here. Next, I have the privilege to introducing Dr. Robert Pape, who is the founder, president, and CEO of NSI Incorporated, a small business that specializes in providing innovative social science solutions to complex problems for clients, predominantly in the defense, intelligence, and national security realm. He serves on the Defense Science Board, Army Science Board, and is a senior associate of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Prior to NSI, Bob served for 5 years as senior government executive within the DoD, 1 year as Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, and 4 years as Deputy of the Information Exploitation Office and of the Information Awareness Office at DARPA. At the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Bob oversaw a number of programs focusing on information assurance and multi-level security, information technology solutions for counterterrorism and foreign intelligence, as well as the Total Information Awareness Program. At DARPA, Bob established a novel R&D trust that focused on applying quantitative and computational social science models and methods to do root cause analysis of instability and conflict within weak and failing states as in governments. Bob holds 2 patents, authored a number of scholarly papers, edited volumes with example titles like Emergent Information Technologies and Enabling Policies for Counterterrorism, Countering Terrorism Through Information and Privacy Protection Technologies, and Utilizing Social Science Technologies to Understand and Counter 21st Century Strategic Threat. Bob holds a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Connecticut and has a BMA in computer science from Boston University, summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, where I had the privilege of being his master's thesis advisor. So you'll always have to remember that. Thank you and for coming. And next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Leonard Raisin, who is an associate professor in the computer science department at BU, specializing in cryptography, security, privacy, and applications of complexity theory and information theory. Leo is a recipient of multiple awards and honors, including the highly coveted National Science Foundation's Career Award, and he was selected in 2006 as a fellow of the Institute for Pure and Applied Mathematics at UCLA. He authored dozens of peer-reviewed papers in some of the most prestigious venues in computer science. His research focuses on extending cryptographic techniques to provide protection in more realistic and more hostile environments. He has contributed to the development of cryptography standards, worked as an industry consultant, served on numerous conference program committees, including some of the top conferences in computer science. At BU, Leo teaches courses on fundamentals of cryptography, advanced cryptography, analysis of algorithms, data structures, and the arts and science of quantitative reasoning. Leo received his bachelor's from Harvard University, worked as a member of the research staff at RSA Labs, went on to receive his master's and PhD from MIT in cryptography, where he worked on zero knowledge with public keys. Leo is passionate about issues of security and privacy as they relate to public policies and law. And on those subjects, he is one of the most informed people that I know. Thank you, Leo, for coming. And last but not least, it's my pleasure to introduce Joseph Whipple, who's a senior lecturer in the International Relations Department at Boston University, specializing in security and intelligence. Joe, a graduate of Marquette University and a PhD candidate in European history at the University of Minnesota, is a former CIO officer who spent 30 years as an operations officer in the National Clandestine Service. He served as an operations officer and manager in Bonn, West Germany, Guatemala City, Luxembourg, Madrid, Spain, Mexico City, Vienna, Austria, and Berlin, Germany. Wow. Among other assignments in CIA headquarters, Joe served as a deputy chief of human resource, as chief of Europe division, and as CIA's director of congressional affairs. While at CIA, he has coordinated extensively with other arms of US intelligence community. Prior to joining the International Relations Department at BU, Joe occupied the Richard Helms Chair for Intelligence Collection in the National Clandestine Service Training Program, and at BU he teaches courses on Homeland Security, on Congress and national security, and on the evolution of strategic intelligence. Thank you and welcome. So I thought what we will do is, given the background, given the subject matter, I will ask each one of the panelists a few questions where they can just share with us their ideas, and that could set the stage for some discussion later on. So I'm going to start with a question to Professor Holnick. And my questions, which I'll pose and I'll let him speak, are threefold. What are the differences? We hear these words all the time. What are the differences between cybercrime, cyber terrorism, and cyber warfare? And does such differentiation make sense or matter? The other question I'd like to ask is, it seems like we are always constantly reacting to these attacks. We read about them in newspaper and we react. We try to develop defenses. Is it possible to be proactive about threats to cybersecurity by anticipating or predicting what's going to happen next? So, Art, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't know the answer to those questions, to be honest, but it seems to me it's a good point of departure for discussion. Does it matter whether there's a difference between cybercrime, cyber terrorism, and cyber warfare? The problem is we have to deal with all of these things, and since we can't really agree on a definition of terrorism, for example, it seems to me it'd be just as difficult to agree on a definition of what is cyber terrorism. It seems to me that as we were discussing this before we had a lunch a couple of weeks ago, and the conversation ranged all over the place, and we really couldn't agree on exactly what definitions we're talking about. And maybe that's the problem, is that this is new enough so that we really haven't come to grips with how to separate and how to differentiate cybercrime from crime in general, or cyber terrorism from the great world of terrorism, or cyber warfare. And interestingly, there have been plenty of examples of all of these things to kick around. From an intelligence perspective, as a former intelligence analyst, we're always trying to think about the future. The whole point of intelligence analysis is to understand the present and try to predict what might happen. So is it possible to do that in the world of cyber terrorism? And surely the answer is yes. I'm impressed with the amount of literature that's out there about this sort of thing. And I can assure you, because I've read quite a bit lately, that the intelligence system is thinking about this in some depth, that people are beginning to see how we might anticipate what cyber terrorists would do, for example, to our infrastructure, or cyber criminals might do to the day-to-day commerce that we have to deal with. So I'm pleased to say that people are beginning to get their arms around this problem, but we haven't come to any definitive answers yet. And maybe in the course of our discussion this evening, we'll get a little bit closer. I was thinking what I would say, and it occurs to me that cyber warfare is about as old as I am. It began in World War II when the British built a primitive computer to try to intercept successfully German communications. And because of this, we're able to make significant inroads into German tactics, strategy, and war plans. So none of this is that new, and so I'm glad we're discussing it in this kind of forum, and I hope that your questions will spur us to get an even more meaningful discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so Art is optimistic that we can predict what terrorist or what kind of crime is going to happen in the future. And one person who's actually makes that a business of his to try to perhaps predict or at least understand how the internet is being used to carry terrorist or illegal activities is Bob. And the questions I have to Bob are, is it possible for analysis to account for or even to keep up with the cyber fingerprints or signatures of terrorists? When terrorists use the internet, there are some practices they use, and we call these in computer science signatures. But think of them as a fingerprint, something I can recognize them with. So is it even possible for analysts to I mean, it seems like there could be an infinite number of them. That's the first question. And, well, the internet is a big place with lots and lots of activities. You can argue there's a lot of noise on the internet. Is it possible to discern the signal, in this case, the signatures, from that noise that's in the background? That's the second question. And is it really possible to do this without reading my email and spying on my packets on the network? So that's my third question.
Thank you. Just like Professor Holrig, I don't know. Those are wonderful questions as well. But my view is, however, those are wonderful empirical questions for which the scientific and the research and development community could invest their expertise and their time in trying to better understand those questions. And in fact, when I was back a few years ago when I was at DARPA, those three very questions were a big part of the agenda that I, with my colleagues at DARPA, were pursuing. The hypothesis that we had at the time was if terrorists are going to engage in adverse actions against the United States, fundamentally it has to involve people, terrorists, right? Now these terrorists can be planners, they can be financiers, they can be foot soldiers, they have all different possible roles. But at the end of the day, if there's going to be adverse actions against the U.S. through terrorism tactics, it has to involve people, terrorists. These terrorists will make transactions in support of their plans and plots and activities. And when you take those transactions, financial transactions and communications transactions, transportation transactions, one can imagine what the many possible transactions that terrorist people can engage in support of their plans, plots, and activities. Those transactions will leave a signature in the information space. And our hypothesis is if you take those transactions over space and time by a group of people who are plotting nefarious things against the U.S., that will form a unique signature in the information space. Now, those transactions, that signature lives in databases that are in the public, that are collected by government and intelligence community agencies, and that also live in private databases. Terrorism is worldwide. Terrorists are worldwide. They engage in the same sorts of transactions that you and I engage in. And their transactions live in the same databases that the transactions that we all make live in. It would be so nice if those databases knew which guys were good guys and which ones were bad, and they could sort of separate the transactions in the databases, but they don't. They're all sort of collected and intermingled. So the questions that Professor Bestavros asked were really, they're great ones, and they're truly amenable to research, which was much of what we were focused on years ago when I was at DARPA. So can analysts imagine the many possible, the countless possible signatures that terrorism and terrorist nefarious plots and activities will create in the information space? And can those signatures be detected when they're embedded in a world of information noise? And in this context, information noise are the sorts of transactions that you and I make. And then thirdly, if analysts can imagine what those signatures look like, and if they can be detected, feasibly, when those signatures are embedded in a world of information noise, then can government analysts who have to comply with many regulations and restrictions and policies that these guys can certainly talk at length about, I suspect, when concerned with U.S. persons, can those signatures be detected without violating people's privacy within the current civil liberties and privacy framework that we all live within today, much of which was put in place many years ago, pre-internet, pre-IT explosion revolution. So they're wonderful questions, but in my view, they're wonderful questions that are, it's a research question, and they're amenable to empirical analysis and scientific study. 3 comments with respect to that, and then I'll be done. In my view, information technology and privacy protection technologies, along with modern day policies that bind the technologies to their intended use, is a fundamental aspect of the research. There's a technology component to this, and there's a policy component to this, and taken together holistically is a major part of the research, in my view. There needs to be a balance struck, given sort of the delicacy of this issue. The country is responsible and charged with, providing security for its citizens, but it's also responsible for safeguarding the civil liberties of its citizens. So there's a balance here. There's a social cost, and there's sort of, there are benefits and costs associated with the introduction of new innovative technologies, which can be very powerful when put into the government's hands. And yet balance it with sort of the interests of privacy, civil liberties, which is sort of a fundamental tenet of the country, of this nation. And then the last component is an understanding of the debate, including a better understanding of the roles of the public, the government, the private sector, academia, the research community, watchdog organizations, et cetera. They're all, in my view, critical to the debate, and there's a lot of dynamics to that debate, which I, unfortunately became well aware of unexpectedly when I was at DARPA pursuing this agenda. But nonetheless, it's extremely important that this kind of work be done in the public, in my view, as opposed to burying it into a classified program without all those organizations involved. So those are my remarks, and I'd be happy to take some questions afterwards. Thanks.
Okay, well, moving on. So I have also a few questions to Professor Raisin. Well, there's conventional warfare, cyber warfare. Can you comment on some of the technical differences between these? That's my first question. And perhaps can you shed some light on how we can defend against cyber attacks? Again, with the notion that the internet itself could be the subject of the attack, or it could be used for attacks. And do we really have a fighting chance? Could it be done? The third one is it possible for the security mechanisms added to our cyber infrastructure to be used as Trojan horses through which the very infrastructure could be attacked? In other words, it's sort of, we're adding a feature, but at the end it becomes a bug. So, Leo.
Thank you. So I won't say I don't know to start with. Instead, I'll just state something obvious. This is another way out of answering a question. The fundamental technical difference between more conventional attacks and cyber attacks is that the mode of attack is code. And that, I mean, it's an obvious statement, we all understand it, but that really leads to a lot of the rest of what I'm going to say, and maybe something slightly less obvious. The fact that the mode of attack is code means, right, there's no explosives, there's no metal, there's no physical objects, there's nothing to transport. There is just information. And information is really, really hard to constrain. You can have a non-proliferation regime for nuclear weapons or chemical weapons and biological weapons. You can debate about how well it works or how poorly it works, but there is some hope, right? Because nukes require testing, material has to flow somewhere from one country to another. You can look at things that are happening. It's much harder to look at the flow of information. Information is cheap, information is ubiquitous, information travels as bits, and therefore it's much harder to find perpetrators. It's much harder to detect who potential perpetrators could be. It's much cheaper to mount an attack. And in fact, attacks can be automated to a much higher degree than any other kind of attacks can be. So, for example, an example of a wonderful automated attack, wonderful in the sense of how telling the example is, there was a slammer worm that was very powerful in 2003. It took over large portions of the internet and slowed things down and so on. And it was an automated worm. It just propagated from computer to computer. And eventually it got into a nuclear plant. Without intending to do so, it got into a nuclear plant in Ohio and actually disabled the safety systems, safety monitoring systems that the operators of the plant were using at the time. Now, that was an automated attack. The very telling feature of that attack is that it was not trying to attack that specific nuclear plant. See, you don't have to choose your target. You do have to choose your target with a bomb, right? You don't have to choose your target with code. It can travel and find its target and then decide what it does. The attack was not targeting any kind of plant. It just slowed it down because, and then eventually crippled their systems because it was a worm that traveled everywhere. So in my view, this technical difference implies that our best hope is defense. And so now let me talk about the second question, the defense. Here's where our best hope is. Because the attack involves no explosives and no physical devices, no one really has to die if we engineer our systems cleverly. Right? If a bomb explodes next to you, there's very little you can do. But if bad code is sitting on a computer next to you, it's okay. Right? You're fine. It's not going to jump out and infect you personally. As long as we engineer our systems cleverly, and as long as we separate things that are really mission critical, that are really life critical, from systems that are perfectly okay if they're compromised. They may cause some economic damage, but nobody dies. So in the case of a nuclear plant, the mistake that they made was that they had some business systems that were running on the same network as operations systems. You don't want your safety critical operation systems to run on the same network as business systems. So what are our hopes for defenses? Separating things where people can die from things where people cannot die, right? Separating really critical networks on their own. Building secure software is our next best defense, but that's very, very hard. Secure software is really hard to build. We don't understand how to do it from an engineering perspective. We don't understand how to do it from a computer science perspective because of the complexity. The complexity of your cell phone is probably 10 to 20 million lines of code. Right? It's an incredibly complex machine, and that's just your cell phone. So we don't understand how to engineer secure software, and that's where a lot of research is needed. And then there's something we do understand very well, but we don't adopt enough, and that's cryptography. Cryptography as the science of secure communication, as a science of authentication and authorization, has been very well developed for at least the past 15 years, but it's been severely underutilized, partly because it takes time for research to get into products, and partly because of various governments, including the US government, restricting the use of cryptography and severely discouraging it, particularly in the 80s and 90s. The government has by now realized that actually that's the best defense probably, but it was not doing so in the 80s and 90s. And then let me shift a little bit to what I think are sort of wrong-headed defenses. It's very tempting, instead of focusing on hardening the systems using secure software, using cryptography, using isolation of really mission-critical systems, to instead focus on watching what's going on, right? Building little back doors so that whoever wants to watch can come in and see what's going on, whoever's authorized to do it. And that only increases the complexity of the system, and that opens it up to abuse. So these are not hypothetical concerns. Very real concern is the discouragement of the use of strong cryptography, which means that most of our communication today is not encrypted well, it could be. Another example, which was probably very prominent in 2005, some of you may have heard of it, there was a big scandal uncovered in Greece where the prime minister, the defense minister, the foreign minister, over 100 important people in government, including the opposition leader, were being wiretapped by people we still don't know. And the way they were wiretapped was at the phone company, because the phone switches had wiretapping capability built in. Well, why did they have wiretapping capability built in? Because of a government mandate, actually not the Greek government mandate, but the US government mandate, that phone switches had to come with wiretapping capability. And 1994 law, for the first time, inserted the FBI into design of phone switches. So companies sell phone switches all over the world. They're not going to build a different one for Greece. So wiretapping capability was present on the phone switch. And that allowed somebody to divert the traffic of the prime minister's cell phone to their own cell phone. And we still don't know who did it. There was a similar example in Italy with Telecom Italia, where there was a wiretap discovered where politicians, sports players, magistrates, some other people were being wiretapped. We still don't know why. And if you look at the design of systems that are used in the US, like the FBI's DCS 3000, which looks at internet traffic, in 2007 it was using outdated cryptography technology. It was using very poor auditing systems. It was using a single password for multiple people. So these systems tend to open up to attack, and I would prefer to harden software rather than to open it up to watchers of software. Sorry, I ran over.
Thought-provoking, to say the least. Moving on, one thing we should all remember, that whether you are attacking the internet or whether you're using the internet to attack or to do terrorist activities, you can do this from anywhere in the world. It's not just in the US. So now I'm going to move a little bit into the international dimension of this. And first question is to Joe is, can you comment on how the law governing the monitoring of private communication changed with the advent of the internet? Again, going back to the theme of maybe we should monitor, well, how does it change with the internet? And second question is, how could the private sector and the public sector work together to secure the cyber infrastructures? And how will these sectors work together internationally? Because they're not in a single country. Is there a counterintelligence mandate? The third question is really more of a social question, and maybe we'll touch on it later. Why are people so sensitive about monitoring of private communication when the government does it, but not so much when, let's say, their employer does it? So that's a question maybe we can also touch on. So, the floor is yours.
Well, the last is the easiest to answer because that way they get miles when they use their credit cards. Yeah, it's the law has changed in one way. It's never been illegal for the U.S. government to listen in on the communications of foreigners outside the U.S. And in the old days, when all this went through the air, if you walked by any U.S. embassy, and other embassies as well, by the way, that's why the Soviet embassy, why they wanted a tall hill in Washington, D.C., they were certainly doing the same thing. You saw a lot of antennas up there and dishes up there, and it was basically to, suck in the conversations that were going on. There was a huge facility in Bad Aibling, south of Munich, which was a very important NSA site, and did exactly the same thing. Now, when I say that, I'd also like to add that it's never been illegal for the French government or the German government or for other governments to listen in on the conversation of their non-nationals. So this isn't something that's uniquely American. But what happened was it went out of the air and it went into fiber optics. And so it sounds counterintuitive, but, if, for instance, I call my colleague Gard Hulnick or call Azer there on, here in Boston, that telephone conversation can go through Paris. It can go just about anywhere, any which way, or come through the United States. So that became a problem for U.S. law. Now, as it stands right now, according to the FISA Amended Act of 2008, the U.S. can listen in on communications between two foreigners originating, overseas, and they can do that. And that was the thing that had gotten into a point of law of whether you can do this if it travels through the United States on fiber optics. You have to get a warrant however, if there is an American involved in the conversation, either overseas or in the United States. So if it's an American, you have to have a warrant. But I think when you're looking at this thing and as far as a national security type of issue and an NSA type of issue, it's got to be like a huge sucking machine, that gets everything out of from internet to conversations, plans by NSA to build a super facility somewhere in Utah, which is going to be able to garner in these communications, and through signatures, and I think also through what you would call telephone chains, would look for potential terrorists and probably as well criminal activities. So it's a very complex and a very unique type of capability that is occurring. Something that's recently been in the press is a very neat, very interesting operation. But apparently, the first hints that there was a nuclear facility being built in Syria came through an NSA investigation of a lot of calls between North Korea and Syria. That was followed up, I think, by some human intelligence on support of this nuclear facility by Iran, followed up by a Trojan horse in London put in by a combination of, must have been Mossad, as well as MI5 and MI6 on a senior Syrian official, showing the plans and pictures of this facility. And then finally, debriefings of the Deputy Minister of Defense of Iran who defected in Turkey. So this is kind of, how these type of things, this type of intelligence is going to play a role in providing information to governments. In this case, the Israelis took out that facility in Syria. Private and public, I mean, that's one of the big issues, and how the two learn from one another, how information is exchanged, how and the private sector has its own agenda, has a business interest in this, wants an efficient and effective cyber system, and government is involved in protecting the cyber systems, as well as using cyber systems in order to counter threats to national security. So I think those are some of the issues that are here, that are going to continue to be here, and I'd say just to finish it all off, you're going to need a lot of really professional people. You're going to really have to get yourself organized. You're going to have to set limits. And then finally, just a comment on the sensitivity of the public versus the private. It's a fascinating thing. I think the public is more concerned about, geez, if someone's listening into my conversations, are they going to find out, I didn't exactly put down all my income for my taxes, or I happen to have some kind of relationship I'd rather not be known to the government, as opposed to the private sector, where you do get miles and you like reading on your computer what kind of goods they think you want to buy from them. and so on and so forth. But that is really an amazing type of thing because, the cyber world can follow you around no matter where you go and can determine what your habits are, what you want, what your desires are. And I personally don't like it, and I usually pay cash no matter where I go. There. Just from my background, I think,
Okay, well,
if I
thank you
take
all
you
for-
out to dinner, you'll see me coming out with cash or asking for your cash. Either way, it'll work.
Well, thank you all for these comments. Now I'm going to open it to the floor, and I really hope to have an interactive discussion with one request. If you want to ask a question, please just give us a minute to get a microphone to you. This event is taped. So with that, I open it to the floor. Questions? Yes, please. Wait for the microphone and then.
Emmanuel Hooper. Actually, I lectured this afternoon at Harvard on this very topic. My students were challenged about cyber threat, cybersecurity. I'm going to throw this question to the panel. The challenge is really between 21st century intelligence in terms of the United States capabilities. And I actually talked to Melissa Hathaway last week. She was the former cyber coordinator at this topic. And the challenge is really this problem is not global. What happens in the United States, like the financial markets, goes overseas, et cetera. And the question is this, that I think it's about time the government, and I think I like the last comment you made about a lot of professionals. The government is not able to really provide all the technical people. The universities don't have the funding, and the public can't really do it themselves. They need experts. The question is, at which point do we trust the government to do their role? And how do it's called the transparency issue, because privacy and security is a good challenge. And I think that the problem of technical is not a problem, because we do have intelligent data mining techniques we can use. But the problem that I think we need to address is, for example, in Britain, when I was coming back on a flight last week, IEEE conference, they had this whole idea of Big Brother watch. That is, can the US, for example, do the same thing like in Europe, where all the communication, internet, traffic, everything will actually be mandated that it had to be kept on the computer for a year? If that happens in Europe, that's going to, sure enough, come to the United States eventually because of terrorism. So how do we trust and trust the government to actually do what is right? And is privacy more important than security, or security more important than privacy? I believe that both go together. Maybe you can elaborate as to how we can establish independent authorities where a watchdog or a big brother watches a big brother, and how we can collaborate to bring this to pass. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very apt and good question. I think, first of all, I don't think you're either going to get or want 100% security. But there's always that kind of push for that. Secondly, I think having good and, above all, clear laws are a big help in this endeavor. I'd also like to, and I've been reading, the laws, and I always find that, first of all, they tend to be confusing, probably because I'm not a lawyer. But also, there's always they always put these hooks on it, and the hook is unless there's a national security emergency. And I've never heard a good definition of national security. It's a word that people use in a very subjective way. Finally, I think, for instance, if you and I were walking around London for a day, we'd probably be photographed 100 times. I personally don't think that takes away, that's the type of thing that takes away liberty, any more than I do a national identity card. I think you still guarantee liberties. But I think I take very seriously that the government, stick to the law and write laws that are clear, concise, and understandable, and watch out for those hooks. And that hook is usually something like, like at the end of the Geneva Conventions, unless it contradicts the Constitution of the United States. Well, all right, well, that opens up a whole new subjective area.
Okay, other members, maybe we should.
Americans have expectation of privacy that goes beyond what most people expect in other places around the world. We've lived in places where the only way to have privacy is to go off in your car after you've swept it for bugs to make sure that nobody's listening, because your house and your office already have devices in it to listen to you. And so I always think this is really overdone, that for example, in my town of Brookline, the police chief wanted to put up cameras to catch speeders, and people began to complain that their privacy was being invaded. I don't see where you have expectation of privacy in public space, but that's the attitude that people have, that somehow there's going to be abuse. I spend a lot of time in government, and nobody wants to abuse these kinds of things. We're trying to find out what's going on to help protect people. And so I don't see it.
But how about
From
the
the
law of unintended consequences? So this is something that, you know, Leo mentioned technically. You allow something, maybe with somebody else is going to use that camera to do something other than. So maybe if other people on the panel want to comment, Bob or Leo.
I wanted Art to finish, but I
I'm
did
sorry.
have something to say. You know, nobody minds a privacy violation if it's being done by people who will never do anything with that information. You won't even know about them. If Martians are violating our privacy, we don't care. They're up there on Mars, right? The issue is what's being done with the information and how it alters our behavior. So, you know, with all due respect to Art's view on the Brookline camera, in Washington, D.C., when cameras were installed, Officer Scott Stowe, a police officer, was blackmailing people whom he found frequenting gay bars. He was actually indicted for that. So if people are well-meaning, right, privacy violations are not an issue. So the question is, do we really trust people? New York Police Commissioner Carrick, who was nominated to be Homeland Security Secretary, was recently indicted, right? Now, again, this is a person who almost became Homeland Security Secretary. I simply don't trust the government enough, not because the government is evil, because people are people. They're human. Many of them will have failures. Similarly, as much as I would like to have clear laws, I don't think they're sufficient. We know that all the wiretap laws were routinely violated, going back to the first wiretap law passed by Congress in the 30s. The Hoover FBI, you know, wiretapped Supreme Court justices and bugged members of Congress. It's well known, and it's well known that it was against the law. The NSA just recently got a stronger surveillance law passed, and then immediately told us that it was over-collecting information. At least it told us. I don't believe that the laws are sufficient. I think they're necessary, but I don't think they're the only protection we have.
But I would add only that abuse can always happen in almost anything that government does. That doesn't necessarily mean the law is bad, but the person who's abused should then be punished for that.
But that's why, right, when we were founding this, not me personally, when this country was being founded, the realization was that the laws will be abused. And therefore, we need to separate the powers, for example, right? That's why we have 3 branches of government. So I think we need to build in structural protections, not just legal protections.
Well, how about the audience? Do you want to jump into this discussion? Other questions? I don't mean to, this seems to be a very interesting thread, but you want to, yes, please.
So I think maybe as an antecedent to useful law, there's a question that I haven't seen well answered, which is, what is the efficacy of our cybersecurity programs? Because there is security theater. I have shoes that I can take off without unlacing them because of TSA security theater. And I don't feel safer when I fly. Maybe some people do. And I think in the cybersecurity space, a lot of what happens is merely to provide an edifice of security, or it's a fishing expedition. So I wonder what either the academic community or the private sector says about analyzing what security is good for and how risks are reduced through any of the measures in place. That seems to be something that's necessary before you start legislating.
Wow, excellent question. Well,
In the security world, I belong to the American Society for Industrial Security, and in the literature that we get periodically, there's a lot of concern about exactly the kind of question you're asking. What is the efficiency and utility of some of these programs? So people are thinking about it. But the problem with something like TSA is that they've hired 45,000 people whose job is to prevent 9/11. Well, it's too late for that. And so every time somebody does something, they have to try to get all these 45,000 people to focus on it in some standardized way. And they lose the sense of what they're doing. The newest thing I saw today is instead of liquids now, they're going to be concerned about powders. So if you have a little thing of baby powder in your carry-on, watch out. TSA will be looking for you. Do they think about why they're doing that? I suspect if you ask most of them, they don't. But it's how you standardize. If we were really thinking about it, we would be doing some other things, but I don't see that happening. But among professional security people, there's a lot of discussion about how to do this right. But I don't think of the 45,000, I hope I'm not offending anybody, of the 45,000 TSA people, most of them are not professional security people, but are hired to go find your baby powder.
Bob, you want to?
So, yeah, a comment on the efficacy question. So, in my mind, it's really important to distinguish between, when you're asking that question for a system that is operational, like a TSA system, versus research that's being done by a community, whether they in the government, the academia, what have you. The standards are very different, obviously. But unfortunately, I think the public and the watchdog organizations and the naysayers who want to really criticize those systems, whether they be on the operational or the research side, they conflate. They don't make that distinction, which I think is really, really important, because when you're in the research business, in my view, it's improving the outcomes and establishing standards or expectations that research ought not to be pursued because it might not work, or it's not foolproof, or it may be abused or misused, is very unscientific, right? It stifles creativity, it stifles innovation, and so forth. So there's lots of wonderful efficacy questions that should be asked and that should be explored and researched within the research venue, and what the expectations are with respect to that in the public, in Congress, by watchdog organizations. That context is really, really important, because the expectations, in my view, are very different versus a deployed operational system that you may see in TSA and so forth. And I think the public doesn't make that distinction. They don't understand it. This is a generalization. But I think what ends up happening is that lots of good work that wants to address the efficacy kind of question never gets happened, or they get scrutinized, and it becomes politicized, and it just unravels. So that's.
Any other comments? Let me maybe a question follow-up. So, when I walk through, okay, I have to take off my shoes when I go through, but maybe I feel good about it, even if it doesn't do anything, but I feel good. Maybe somebody's doing something, right? Now, the question is, for the internet, if somebody's listening on my packets, does that make me feel better? Even if it's not efficient. So I think there is at least something to be said in a physical world for at least trying. I see you don't disagree. It's a question. I don't know if that's the case. So.
If I could offer a follow-up as a corollary
Sure.
to preventing 9/11, right? In cybersecurity in the private sector, security often ends up being standardization, right? So if you standardize on Windows and IE6, you've already lost, because you're leaving your corporate network, your enterprise network, vulnerable to known exploits, right? So that's an attempt, I think, to solve a problem in a very wrong-headed way that's like taking away my water bottle when I want to get on an airplane. And I think, to Robert's point, maybe the research around, gambling markets or voting markets that look at predicting where the attack is going to come from a community of experts is a much more interesting way to get at it. And I'd love to hear what you think about those kinds of things, the wisdom of crowds and crowdsourcing, as well as, any kind of open source attempts at creating not so much an air-gapped and rigid and standardized network of security, but an open network that says, the way we're going to be safe is by having all of our exploits known and having, all the good guys in the world working on preventing, an attack. So
quick comment. So I personally, I'm a huge believer in using future markets to do for predictive model and to do data integration and so forth. But back to my comment previously. So one of our programs that we had when I was back at DARPA was called FutureMap, which stands for Future Markets for Prediction. And the program manager was an NSF scholar, a mathematician by training. Wonderful research, asking the very question, how do we use open markets, right, for these sort of terrorism types of questions where, and trying to figure out what the incentive structures are and all that other kind of stuff, that was part of the research. Well, the Hill and the public and the watchdogs got a hold of sort of, some briefings and descriptions of what that project was about, and they refer to it as DARPA's betting parlor, right? And then it just spun out of control politically, and then it quickly was ended because of the politics of it. So, in terms of a concept, wonderful. In terms of doing research, with respect to doing research to investigate that kind of methodology for for predictive modeling, absolutely. The trick is how to educate the non-scientific community in understanding what the purpose of the research are, what the potential value and limits of that kind of technology is and is not with respect to national security matters, and being able to contextualize it appropriately. Because again, I think what happens is they don't have that understanding. It gets conflated. They hear about a program like that, and they suddenly think the FBI and the CIA and NSA are sort of in the middle of betting parlors with all of you, and that's the problem, or a problem.
How about the point about open source? Would maybe Leo want to jump on that?
So in the cryptography community, which is where I come from, in the past 20 years or so, there's been a realization that you don't get security by being secretive about things. You get security by being very open about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what the best practices are. And to their credit, the National Security Agency, the NSA, has realized this as well and is contributing to the public security discussion about how to secure our systems quite well. So the recent, for example, efforts to standardize the new hash function have been very public. So I think we're moving towards that direction.
Very good, thank you. Well, other questions?
I sometimes want to ask people, don't you want the intelligence system to protect you? Don't you really want the system to be able to catch the bad guys? That's what they're trying to do. I don't know colleagues in my 35 years in the business, colleagues who were intent on doing the wrong thing. They're more intent on trying to do what was useful and helpful. So it makes me feel bad when the people talk about how the government is the chief abuser. It doesn't intend to be.
I mean, but unfortunately, history works against us because there's plenty of examples where, government officials have done, and plus because they are government officials, they have a lot more power than ordinary citizens have, and the abuse that they can levy on people can be pretty significant. And so a couple of bad apples really do tremendous damage for the whole writ large. I'm with you. The government, they don't have time to do some of the things that are fancied about, in the public about what the government wants to do. But a couple of bad apples can really do a lot of harm.
Oh. And you're not in the government anymore, so maybe you shouldn't feel that. Okay, there was a question here, please.
I think this is directed to Leonard about secure code. I just got at 2 o'clock today, I got a phone call from a former student of Boston University. And he is asking for any contractor or anyone who can help with authenticating or securing the code for DHL. They are going to finish, Northeast Bank is the bank, and in Maine, and they want to write secure code. They want someone who can guarantee that the DHL code they are writing, web-based application using .NET, is secure. So I said, yeah, I'll probably look around and see if there is any consultant or any student I know who can look at the .NET code and say, yes, it's secure. So this is a real job. If anyone wants the, you catch me during the
Do they need
reception.
somebody who
I'll
can
give
say
it to
yes,
you.
it's secure, who can actually prove to you that it's secure? See, it's the latter that's a lot harder. There's lots of people willing to say yes, and they will name their price for the yes. But we actually don't have a good enough understanding of how to write secure code. We have better understanding than we did 10 years ago, but it's not good enough.
Hire a hacker. I'm not. This is actually what's going on. Is that a number of corporations have sought out people who are hackers to help them defend against others, and they see it as a challenge.
Okay, I see a couple of hands. So, okay, here's the hand. Okay.
I just had a question. In looking at this in the strategic sense, how do you develop doctrine or policy to combat cyber attacks or cyber warfare when, in a conventional sense, you have accountability and there's, proportionality and you assume the order of battle of the adversary. In this case, how do you respond if an attack goes through a country that may not have known their computers were compromised? And I'm assuming DoD has some classified cyber strategy, I don't know. But do you make that declaratory policy so that you can hold people accountable for breaches in their networks, or just your thoughts on that?
That's an excellent question. So, is there such a thing as a citizen of a government? You can go after the government because they're citizen of something. On the internet, what does that mean? Oh, anyone who wants to take a bite at that?
Well, I'll try for a beginning at least. We've had some examples of things like this in Estonia and Georgia, attacks on another country's cyber system, as well as some originating apparently in China against Canadian systems. That is a question that no one has even come close to figuring out. If it's something like, for instance, shutting down or disabling the security systems of nuclear plants, that could result in some kind of, serious accident, that would almost be the type of thing where you'd think there could be a military response to something like that. You could, other things that could happen is, a cyber attack on someone else's system from whom it originated. I think probably the most reasonable type of thing is, some kind of international way of working together to make sure that nothing like that ever happened, depending on what exactly it was. But I think that's probably one of the, as far as from my readings of all this about cybersecurity, the international aspect is the part that's so important, because so much of it can come from other places. I mean, the crime can come from another country into your country, but how do you prosecute a crime like that, and how do you deal with a crime like that? I also believe that the Department of Defense has a real offensive cyber attack capability. If they don't, I would be extremely surprised, because that's what they basically get paid to do, to think ahead. But a lot of that there should be a certain amount of transparency in that type of business. And I think I agree here with Leo that transparency in that sense would make you more secure rather than less secure. And it can even come from a non-government type of entity to attack a system. So there's a lot of things involved in this. And again, I think it's important to get organized and to get professional. And we need somebody who's really in charge on this type of thing. You got to get a lot of good people, a lot of professional people. You have to pay them.
But part of the problem with our former colleagues is that they don't like transparency. They want everything to be secret. They want you know, some years ago, when Judge Webster became director of CIA, somebody gave him a button that said, "My job is so secret, even I don't know what I'm doing."
Well, he didn't know either anyway, even if it was thinking, no, I'm doing.
But the reality is that sharing of information is really a hard sell among some of our former colleagues, especially the ones involved in security issues. And we saw that just recently in the case of the Major Hassan at Fort Hood, when they were learning that there was information about him and some of his activities that were questionable, was not shared with people who might have done something about it. And that was the part of the problem on 9/11, that people talk about connecting the dots. Suppose you had a whole bunch of dots and no numbers. How would you connect them? Think about it.
Okay, very good. There was another question back there, right? Question, yeah.
Professor Bestavros, I actually wanted to jump back to the question about, I guess, making a secure web application. And this might be something for the panel, but this seems like this becomes more of an issue of confidence and almost assurance. For instance, and some of my coworkers here would also be able to talk about this. I'm currently actually doing hacking against websites for my job. And the goal is to give some type of reasonable assurance that the website is not vulnerable to cross-site scripting, SQL injection, CSRF, all that good stuff. But in our statement of work, we explicitly say, our job, whether we find vulnerabilities manually or through automated testing using a variety of tools out there, we say in our statements of work that this testing isn't comprehensive. It is not meant to find everything under the sun. And of course, as consultants, we're not going to put our behinds in the line for such a thing anyway to begin with. The standard consultant answer, it depends. We're not going to give you a concrete answer. So when I do such an assessment, and I find very few vulnerabilities or no vulnerabilities, I will say it looks secure, but I can't say for a fact, because based on the methods that I'm using and based on these automated tools, they're still based on signatures or based on things that already exist. So I guess there's always seems to be this level of confidence and security that there's always something out there. There's always something vulnerable. Where do you guys see this progressing in terms of, are we able to increase his confidence in the future? Or are we always stuck with the fact that for every vulnerability that's found, there's a magnitude greater will never be found until someone exploits it?
Leo, go ahead.
Jump in. I think there is very promising research out there, but I think it's very much in the research phase. There's talk about proof-carrying code that proves that it's correct, for example, right? Partly it's educating the workforce in using these methods, partly it's getting the methods to be more usable. I think we can get more confidence, but it'll take time, which is why what I said earlier is something I very strongly believe in. Separate truly life-critical systems, what's called air-gap them, don't hook them up to networks, make them really not subject to these kinds of attacks until we figure out how to do this. I think it'll take years, decades.
In my view, the goal for I totally agree with that. In the non-critical systems, we know the hacking exists. We know there's intrusions and so forth. Firewalls were meant to be defensive, right? Sort of protect and defend against. I think the reality nowadays is that the goal should be to be robust with the knowledge of that these intrusions and attacks are happening. So how can you make systems, with the recognition that there's going to be sort of leaks and attacks and so forth? How do you make your system robust to such realities? I think that's sort of the framework, the mental framework that sort of people should have.
Okay, we have time maybe for one or two more questions. Okay, Steve.
So I'm gonna change the subject just a little bit, because I've recently been to a couple of similar panels, more with industrial representation, and in one case just government representation. The government these days is giving out a pretty large chunks of money for people to do things. So I'm curious if you were given, say, to name a round number, or $10 or $15 billion, where would you spend it to strengthen our cybersecurity or to defend against cyber attacks? What would you do with it? And related to that, and this second question is more to the two gentlemen at the two ends of the table who are more related to intelligence, is a question that I often ask the people I know from the NSA, and that is, late at night, what worries you the most about
What wakes you up at night?
about cyber attacks or cybersecurity, and what keeps you up?
Okay, well, let's start with the...
How much money was that you said?
I was being cheap. 10 or let's say $100 billion. That's not
100
that
billion
much
with a B.
Billion with a B, oh. Less than the bailout?
So anybody wants to claim that check?
Actually, that's one of the things that we were talking about the other day in class, is the state of the budget for intelligence, which is about $50 billion. It's supposed to be secret, but everybody knows it. And actually, the Director of National Intelligence made it public this year for one of the few times that's happened. And most of that, really, when you think about it, the cheapest part of it is for people. I think the best hope that we have in doing better in fighting cyber crime or cyber terrorism is do a better job of finding the right people. Our system for finding the right people is badly broken and really needs to be fixed. There's an awful lot of talent out there, but it's not getting into the system. And the reason it's not getting into the system is because we put up so many barriers to hiring that a lot of real good talent doesn't make it into the system when that's got to be fixed. So I would spend the money fixing that part of it. And it wouldn't take a lot, really.
Can I have what's left? So what's left, I would spend maybe on. Okay, so let me start at the beginning. Part of the reason the software is so insecure is because there are very few incentives to make it secure, monetary incentives. There's no liability for bad software. And imposing a liability for bad software on the industry would be very expensive, and there are good arguments for it and there are good arguments against it. But if you've got $100 billion and you can use that to cover the liability, but still somehow make liability individual. So I'll give you the money if you end up not being liable, right? Run some kind of insurance scheme with that money where people don't end up losing it. I think I would probably spend it there. Imposing some sort of liability that ends up being overall zero cost, but does benefit people whose software is more secure rather than people whose software is less secure. I think that would go a long way to building incentives and stimulating research in this area.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, I think I just, and this is where I'm completely naive or unknowing of the whole cyber issue, but I would certainly make sure with the money that all the key sectors of our economy that are dependent on cyber, which is an enormous amount, would get either added layers of protection, great backup, that if there was ever an attack against them, that they would be retrievable and be able to be set up immediately without being attacked again right away, so that you could find out exactly what happened. So I think that's what I'd do with the cash.
I would carve it out, part of it offensive, part of it defensive. On the offensive side of it, I would just, the goal would be whatever anybody can do to us, whether they person, nation, rogue, whatever, we can do something like 100 times worse. So it's like the modern day version of mutually assured destruction, right? If they attack us, then we can come back, 100-fold, and making sure people know that. So that's part of protection. On the defensive side, truly, and I'm not sure 100 billion would do it, but trying to, as best possible, trying to get an assessment of truly what the vulnerabilities of the country are. A lot of it, I think, resides in sort of critical infrastructures at the private sector. sort of controls. So truly understanding what those vulnerabilities are, getting the private sector to be willing to engage in sort of, showing the world or, the sponsors sort of what the vulnerabilities are, and then figuring out at least what would be necessary to mitigate those risks. So that certainly would be a part of it as well. And then hopefully those two things.
Well, thank you very much. We have come to the end of the program, and I did promise people will be on time. So let me thank you all for coming, and certainly please join me in thanking the panelists for a wonderful presentation. Just want to remind you that we have a little reception outside. I certainly had prepared a lot of questions in case you will not ask questions. Obviously, I didn't have to ask any of them. So I'm sure you also have some questions which you feel free to discuss outside. Thank you.